Chapter 7. The Sage's Truth. The air was still and cold. The mountains surrounding the shrine bathed in the golden light of the setting sun. Ash stood at the edge of the clearing, his heart pounding in his chest as he stared at the ancient stone shrine. It was smaller than he remembered, weathered and worn by time, but there was something undeniably powerful about it, something that made his skin prickle with anticipation. Serena stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of the sage. They had been searching for him for so long, following his cryptic trail through the mountains, hoping for answers. And now, finally, they were here. But the clearing was empty. Ash's stomach churned with a mixture of dread and frustration. What if the sage wasn't coming? What if they had come all this way for nothing? I don't understand, Serena muttered, her brow furrowed in confusion. He was here last time. Why isn't he? Before she could finish, a soft, rustling sound came from the trees behind them. Ash's heart leaped into his throat, and he spun around, his pulse racing. Out of the shadows, a figure emerged, cloaked in a long, flowing robe that shimmered faintly in the fading light. His face was hidden beneath a hood, but there was no mistaking who it was. The sage had returned. Ash's breath caught in his throat as the sage approached, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. There was something eerie about his calmness, something unsettling about the way he seemed to glide across the ground without making a sound. When he finally reached the center of the clearing, he stopped and turned to face them, his hooded gaze resting on Ash. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken questions. Then, the sage spoke, his voice low and smooth, like the whisper of the wind through the trees. "You have come far," he said, his words carrying a weight that made Ash's chest tighten. "Farther than I expected." Ash clenched his fists at his sides, his heart pounding in his ears. "You know why we're here," he said, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and fear. "You know what's been happening to me." The sage nodded slowly, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his hood. Yes, I know. Ash's pulse quickened, his frustration boiling over. "Then why?" he demanded, his voice rising with each word. "Why did you do this to me? Why am I?" he broke off, his voice trembling as he glanced down at his body, at the curves and softness that had replaced the boyish frame he had once known. "Why am I changing?" The sage remained silent for a moment, his gaze never leaving Ash. When he finally spoke, his words were calm, almost soothing, but they carried a weight that made Ash's stomach twist with dread. Because, the sage said softly, "this is the path you were meant to walk." Ash stared at him, disbelief flooding his chest. "What are you talking about? I didn't ask for this. I didn't want any of this." The sage's gaze remained steady, unyielding. No, you did not ask for it. But that does not mean it was not meant for you." Ash's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the sage's cryptic words. You cast a spell on me. You did this to me." The sage inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging the truth of Ash's accusation. Yes, I cast the spell, but it was not done out of malice. It was done for a purpose. Ash felt his hands trembling at his sides, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. This man, this sage, had taken his life, his body, and twisted it into something unrecognizable, all without his consent. And now he was standing here, calmly telling Ash that it was all part of some grand plan? What purpose? Ash demanded, his voice cracking. What possible reason could you have for doing this to me? The sage was silent for a long moment, his gaze thoughtful, as if considering how best to explain. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than before, almost gentle. You have always been strong. Ash, Ash, the sage said, his words slow and deliberate. Your strength, your determination, your will to succeed, it has carried you far. But there is more to life than strength. There is more to understanding than power. You have spent your life striving to be the best, to win battles, to achieve greatness. But there is another side to life, another path that you have never truly walked. Ash shook his head, his mind reeling. What are you talking about? I've spent my whole life becoming a Pokemon master. That's my path. That's who I am. The sage's gaze darkened, his voice taking on a more serious tone. That is only one part of who you are. But there is another side to you, a side you have never fully embraced, a side that can only be understood by living a different life. Ash's heart raced, his stomach twisting with fear. What do you mean? The sage took a step closer, his voice lowering to a near whisper. In order to truly understand Serena, to understand the world she lives in, the world of beauty, of finesse, of performance, you must experience it yourself, not as an outsider, but as part of that world. Ash's breath caught in his throat, his mind spinning as the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. You're saying I have to live as her? The sage nodded slowly. Yes, yes. In order to understand the balance between strength and beauty, between power and grace, you must live as Serena does. You must walk her path, experience her challenges, her victories, her struggles. Only then will you truly understand. Ash's blood ran cold, his heart pounding in his chest. But this is just temporary, right? Right? You said it was a test. You said. The sage shook his head, his expression grave. No, no, Ash. This is not a test. This is your new reality. Ash's heart stopped, his breath catching in his throat. What? What are you saying? The sage looked at him, his eyes filled with something that resembled pity. The transformation is permanent. The words hit Ash like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think. His entire world seemed to tilt on its axis, the ground beneath his feet slipping away as the full weight of the sage's words crashed down on him. Permanent. The transformation was permanent. No, Ash whispered, shaking his head in disbelief. No, no, that can't be right. You can't do this. You can't. The sage's expression remained calm, unyielding. It has already been done. Ash's mind raced, his thoughts a jumbled mess of confusion and fear. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. He had spent the past 8 months thinking this was all temporary, that eventually he would go back to being himself, that he would get his old life back. But now the sage was telling him that it was permanent, that he would be stuck like this forever. No, Ash shouted, his voice breaking. This isn't fair. You can't just take my life away like this. The sage's gaze never wavered. I have not taken your life away, Ash. I have given you a new one. Ash's fists clenched at his sides, his entire body trembling with rage and fear. I don't want a new life. I want my old life back. I want to be me again." The sage remained calm, his voice steady. "You are still you, Ash. But you are also something more now. This transformation is not a curse. It is a gift." "A gift?" Ash spat, his voice thick with disbelief. "You call this a gift? You've taken everything from me. My body, my identity, my future. How can you stand there and call this a gift?" The sage's expression softened, and for the first time, there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. "I know this is difficult for you to accept, but in time, you will come to understand. You will see that this transformation is not the end of your journey, but the beginning of a new one." Ash shook his head, his breath coming in ragged gasps. No, I can't. I can't live like this. I can't, Ash." Serena's voice was soft, full of concern. She stepped closer to him, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "It's going to be okay. We'll figure this out." But Ash couldn't hear her. His mind was spinning, his vision blurring as the reality of the situation crashed down on him. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't something he could fix. He was stuck like this. Forever. Forever. "No, no," Ash whispered, his voice barely audible. "No, no, this can't be happening." Serena's hand tightened on his arm, her voice gentle but firm. "Ash, Ash, look at me." Slowly, Ash lifted his gaze, his eyes meeting Serena's. Her expression was full of compassion, but there was also a hint of fear in her eyes. She was just as shocked as he was, just as unprepared for the truth. "We'll figure this out," Serena said softly. "We'll get through this together." But Ash shook his head, his chest tightening with panic. "How? How? How can we get through this? I'm not me anymore." Serena's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "You're still you, Ash. You're still the person I care about. That hasn't changed." Ash's breath hitched in his throat, his hands trembling at his sides. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe that he was still the same person, that this transformation hadn't taken everything from him. But as he looked down at his body, at the soft curves, the delicate features, the unmistakable femininity that had replaced the boy he had once been, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had lost something vital, something he could never get back. I don't know who I am anymore," Ash whispered, his voice breaking. The sage stepped forward, his gaze calm and steady. "You are still Ash Ketchum. You are still the boy who set out to become a Pokemon master. But now, you are also something more. You are part of a different world now, a world of beauty, of grace, of performance. And in time, you will come to understand that this transformation is not a burden, but a blessing." Ash's heart pounded in his chest, his mind reeling. How could this be a blessing? How could losing everything he had ever known, everything he had ever been, be anything but a nightmare? "I don't want this," Ash whispered, his voice trembling. "I don't want to be someone else." The sage's gaze softened. "You are not someone else, Ash. You are simply evolving." Ash's breath caught in his throat, his chest tightening with a mixture of fear and anger. This wasn't an evolution. This wasn't something he had chosen. This was something that had been forced upon him, something he had never asked for. I don't want to evolve," Ash said through gritted teeth. "I want to go back to the way things were." The sage shook his head slowly. "There is no going back." Ash's heart sank, the full weight of the sage's words crashing down on him. There was no going back. There was no way to reverse the transformation. He was stuck like this, forever. For a moment, the world seemed to spin, the ground tilting beneath Ash's feet. He felt lightheaded, dizzy, as if the air around him had suddenly become too thin to breathe. His chest tightened, his hands trembling as the reality of his situation began to sink in. This was it. This was his life now. He was no longer Ash Ketchum, the boy who wanted to be a Pokemon master. He was someone else entirely.